It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blazed the trail toward freedom. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
It was sung
by immigrants as they struck out to the shores, pioneers who pushed westward against the unforgiving wilderness. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
It was the call of workers organized.
From WBRNRadio and on the Boston Red Network, the title of our episode on the 30th of September 2018 is The State of Podcasting. This is National Podcasting Day, or International Podcasting Day, excuse me. Let me get the title straight here. And it ran 2 days, and we'll have a link to it. And we're appreciative of the people that presented it. It was 2 days of, it started on Saturday the 29th at 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and to Sunday, September 30th, which is today. And I believe the last cast is at 10 p.m. Out there. International Podcast Day wraps up, and we'll hear live a little bit from them. I have to look and see where we are. We're probably, where are we? Let me see. It is 11:38 Eastern Standard Time. So 3 hours difference around, let's see, around 9 p.m. out in the west. And we'll have Ms. Perez will be there. Wait a minute. This is from the Philippines. We had various people during the day here. We'll just put this up because we can't obviously get all of them. The people from Blueberry were there. Todd Cochran, Group Focus for What for Your Community, excuse me, was his. That was at 6 p.m. And the 13th Annual People's Choice Podcasting Award ceremony, that was on at 5 p.m. This is all Central Time here, and the podcast. This is an interesting podcast here, and you will hear this. We did little pieces of podcasting this day. We'll have Anne Marie Cross. She's from New Zealand. She's known as the Queen of Podcasting. And we'll have bits and pieces. We'll have Pablo Lapado. He is the Union of Podcasters. From the Union of Podcasters. This is the in Espanol. You'll hear a little bit of it. And several others going along here. The Bloomberry people were in there. We have many here from the UK. I'm just looking at Aaron Farah from the UK, Joanne Burke, Sweeney Burke. Looks like an Italian flag. I'm not sure what that is. But anyway, several others here. Somewhere here we let's see. Some of the usual suspects show up here. Were instrumental in bringing it to the people. So we commend them. A happy International Podcasting Day out there. And we have it up on our Facebook page. You can go up there and get it. But let's go very, very quickly here to some of the statistics. We're given these statistics from Edison Research. Edison Research, incidentally, is the same organization that does the post-presidential polls. And they are the official people for bringing the numbers out when they do these polls, and also the polling. They do polling during Election Day in the United States. And the other part is from Nielsen. Is from Nielsen. We'll just give you the raw numbers here. Won't go into the studies, but the state of podcasting. Now, this is in the U.S. 44% of U.S. population have listened to a podcast, and 49% of podcast listening is done at home. 22% while on the road. They put the car, but we'll put while on the road. Now, our former partner, Jared Pippin, was one of the people that pioneered what is now called euphemistically podcasting. We call it internet radio here at WBRN Radio, and it is a byproduct of radio, no doubt about that. He did it on the air. He simulcast with radio station KBIX, and his was a live feed. In fact, is run by some of the people that are still in the business that will simulcast your podcast on a live radio. I believe they're out of Denver. They were out of Denver. I'm not certain as to where they are at this point in time, but have a list of those people up there. I was able to pull this information from the Podcast News. And if you go to Podcast News, you can find out about them. But back to the stats here. Let me just finish this kind of overview here quickly of the stats and where they are. And in terms of 80% listen to all or most of each podcast, according to this, and listen to an average of 7 shows per week. And the audience there is 49% are women, 44. Wait a minute here. 40% are women, and 54% are men, according to this graphic here. 50% of all homes are podcast fans, and over 60 million homes. Some of the information out there. 64, and this is from Nielsen, from Q3, the most up-to-date we have. 64% of the population is familiar with the term podcast, up from 60% in 2012. 50% of all U.S. homes are podcast fans. Now, this was in August of 2017. 14%, 124 million of the U.S. population have listened to podcasts, up from 40% in 2017. 20%, 73 million, listen to podcasts at least once a month, up from 24%. So it's going by 2%. 17% listen to podcasts weekly. That is 48 million. 16 million in the U.S. are avid podcast fans. And 45% of monthly podcast listeners have household incomes over $79,000 versus 25% of the total population. 27% of U.S. households have that listen to the podcast / internet radio have college degrees versus 19% for the U.S. population. 36% are non-European. Let's get this a little bit more precise in what they have. Versus 30% in 2010. So it grew 6% amongst people of color. 49% podcast listening is done at home. I think we already had that statistic coming up here. And looking at us, what else do they have here? 51% of bottled water households are podcast listeners. 57% of baby food. The beer thing here, and with the Kavanaugh hearings, 53%. So I guess old Kavanaugh is listing. This comes from Nielsen in 2017. Of the juice households, I guess this is juice, 56%. That's from Q1 of this year. And the milk households, 54% of them. So some of the information put out here, we roughly have somewhere that statistic over 900, over 9 million, households that actually listen there. And this is something from the Fast Company, the statistic here. In 2004, 7 million of these podcasts, internet radio broadcasts were downloaded. It jumped to 13.7 billion episodes. This is from across podcasters and iTunes, for those, I suppose, that listen to iTunes. And let me quickly move along here. From the Nielsen people here, or Edison people, excuse me. This is some of what is going on with podcasting. Listen to podcasts. Let's see if we can get a little bit of this.
Hey everybody, it's Tom Webster from Edison. We're going to get started in just 2 minutes, so grab a snack. PodCon 18, and to answer the Hall of Fame webinar question of all time right up front, this presentation will be available shortly after we wrap up here today. So the first thing I'm going to go through, and some of you may have seen some of this, but there's new data to come, is data from the Infinite Dial, the study that we do each year with Triton Digital. This is a nationally representative telephone study, 50% landline only, 50% mobile only, of Americans 12 plus, that looks at a whole range of their digital media consumption habits and behaviors. Survey was offered in English and Spanish, and we've weighted these data to the national 12 plus of the podcast consumer. And here, the podcast consumer, as I mentioned before, we are defining as people who have listened to at least a podcast in the last month. The podcast consumer, the regular podcast consumer here, much more likely to make more than $100,000 per year in terms of household income. So they are continue to be a very attractive advertising target, and certainly as the dollars that have flowed into the space have continued to increase over the years, that remains true. Podcast consumers are also more likely to have attained higher levels of education. You look all the way at the right, 23% of the U.S. population has some graduate school or an advanced degree. That's 34% with podcast consumers. Again, that split used to be even higher. That continues to balance out a little bit. Back in the early days of podcasting, when I first started listening, it almost required a graduate degree to even consume them. But of course, now they're very, very frictionless. And you can see the employment picture here, the employment composition of podcast consumers versus the U.S. population. 45% of the U.S. population, according to census figures, have a full-time job. 54% of podcast consumers do. And you can look all the way, the other categories here, mostly even. The big difference you can see are retirees. Again, there's that 55-plus opportunity, the golden opportunity to be terrible. Let's take a quick look now at weekly podcast listening. And again, we did report on this before in the Infinite Dial, which we did several weeks ago, myself and John Rosso from Triton Digital. An estimated 48 million Americans say they've listened to a podcast in the last week. Nearly 50 million. We're getting there for a weekly podcast audience. And that's up from 15% last year to 17% this year. So that number continues to grow. Another number that continues to grow is the average time that weekly podcast listeners spend listening to podcasts. Again, these are weekly podcast listeners. We'll make that exception here. I'm generally showing you monthly. And you can see the pie is fairly well distributed here, but the mean, 6 hours and 37 minutes. And the mean last year was about 5 hours. It was about 5 hours and about 5.
So the mean has went up?
5 years. But even still, the number of the percentage of people that have come in through the door and become a weekly podcast listener in the last 6 months or the last 6 to 12 months is pretty impressive.
Okay, we'll put this on. The Canadian podcast listener is a little different. We'll look at it in terms of where the people are in Canada. And we don't have... we'll have to go back and... this is actually a sneak preview of the study, and we two distinct podcasts in Canada would be in English, more in English than in in French. So little different situation in Canada. One other thing I want to cover before we leave here, breaking down the door to the podcasting club. That's the establishment there. There's been a bit of chubby aspect, a clubby aspect to certain rules of admission, however unattended, might otherwise seem designed to keep podcast listening the preserve of the true believers. This was when the more Apple podcasters there, crushing the data from the second year of the Canadian podcast listeners, some signs of those rules and misperceptions being maybe limiting the growth of podcasting. And we'll have to get to this, finding an in-depth study that was 1,500 podcast listeners. The survey asked podcasters to tell us up to 10 podcasts they listen to. Most podcast growth is coming from listeners inside the club, not those knocking on the door. In Canada, let's see, Edison Research tracked in the U.S., our research showed that 26% of Canadian adults now listen to podcasts at least once a month. That's up 2% from 24%. Canadians who said they even listen to podcasts by only inching up from 43 to 45% there. The flip side of the growth story, while monthly podcast listening has grown from 24 to 26%, nearly half of those monthly podcast listeners, 11% of all Canadians say they just started listening to podcasts the past year. That is perhaps up 2 points here. Podcasting isn't just for Apple users anymore, no doubt about that. It has moved on to other venues. I'm not even sure what this podcast does on Apple. We don't have Apple devices and not interested in Apple. And the iTunes brigade amongst Canadians who listen to podcasts for 2 or more times a year. iTunes charts and listens 16% are less affluent than families and friends. The website's 49%. Friends 41%, social media 36%. This is where things are changing. We've done these before, and now we are moving more and more towards this thing called, started out internet radio, still is internet radio, is returning to it. Now we have what's called digital. People like Roland Martin, he used to be at BET. He now has his digital cast on Facebook. Al Sharpton, the national leader, has cast on Insignia. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. And various other formats. YouTube, people have been there for a very long time. But you see that people are going, even our audio, you can get this cast on YouTube under Boston Red there. And so we are there, and we have not done one on Facebook. We used to do live streams with the video on live streaming. So it is growing there. So we're sort of hurrying along here. So we are moving sort of rapidly here. I think what we'll do in terms of this broadcast, we'll be across some of the channels, and perhaps some of the other channels will come in on another day there. So we do have a little wrap up here of some of these, and let's see if we can go back to them just for a couple of minutes.
It's transformative to see characters who are not only representative, but are engaging in positive behaviors, are shown as successful and valued, and are seeking happiness for themselves and for their loved ones. So the next one I'm going to bring up is diversity behind the scenes in production and creation. It's important to have diversity at all levels, not just for equitable representation, but for making sure that we are breaking down barriers at all levels, especially ones that are there because of things like institutional patriarchy, such as a lack of women and non-binary folk in tech-based sectors like sound engineering. So I'm going to talk about the podcast Love and Luck. Love and Luck is a queer romance podcast about two men, one cis and one trans, who fall in love, and together they create an inclusive queer space and community with maybe a little bit of help. Love and Luck actively pushes against tropes like barrier gaze and tragic gaze. It's about showing happy stories for queer people and overcoming adversity and comfort in showing queer, happy lives and not deaths.
There's some of the diversity out there in podcasting. We just picked this up. This is auto fiction as a diverse gateway to podcasting. She's actually doing this out of Puerto Rico, although it's in English. But anyway, there are many people in the podcasting space. There is no doubt about that. And let me just, I'd be remiss here talk about some of the people I think they are here that are actually bringing this forward. Some of their sponsors. I don't see it here right now, but we go to some of the sponsors here. Of course, Blueberry is always here. And some of the others, Podcasting Success Academy, some of you heard. I don't see, I guess they weren't in on this one. One of the premier hosting sites, I don't see them around, so they are not here. Let me just go through the speakers list here very quickly. People from India. She's from Australia, but or maybe she moved. This is Marianne Cross and Brian Crawford. He's been around. This is Chris Neal. He's actually the host. And Daniel J. Lewis. He's one of the Audacity of podcasts. He's always around. Lipson was the one I was thinking of. I don't see they weren't here for this one. There's some Eagle Jones from Trinidad Tobago. Sorry, not Tobago. And this, I think, is a lady here. Wait a minute here. Well, maybe not. Eleanor Fernandez. I think this was the one from Puerto Rico. I may be wrong on that one. Let's see who else here. Names that we know. People. Foster from the UK. I think I've seen him before. And let's see. Joanne Sweeney Burke. She's from Ireland. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And Izzy Perez from the Philippines. Some people that are speaking here from France. Laurie Martinez from France. And somebody named Hannaford from China. Didn't see any Chinese types here. Union of Podcasters. This was the one. Porto Leopardo from Argentina. Oh yeah, we saw him there. And there was a guy also from Mexico. So this is an international. We commend them on having an international broadcast here. And Todd Cochran himself of Raw Voice and Blueberry. Basically, they are the ones presenting this particular international podcast day. Tom evidently is. Todd, I always call him Tom. He's come out here with a very good broadcast, a very good effort. We thought we would do our part in this here at the Boston Red Network and WBRN. Normally, our podcast episodes are much more statistical than this particular one is, but we are as statistical as we could. This one article here we had breaking down the doors to the podcasting club. This is a Canadian podcast listener in Canada. One of the things here with a little more time, that we get all the time, I should say, not to be redundant, is that many of the podcasts you listen to, whether you go to iHeart, where we camp out at, one of the places we camp out at, not so much at Spreaker, but Stitcher, etc. You'll see podcasts from CBS, NBC, etc., across the board. The more established media organizations, news organizations, they are there, and that is part of, as H says, the front of the line. And then you have roughly millions of other podcasters out there. When you have 900 million, I had the figure here, had 900 million podcasts and growing. So a little bit of what is going on there. And let me just see if we can. I think this is where we had the 950 million of those. This is early June. And over 25,000 active shows and 18.5 million episodes. Now that is what it's probably from the Apple franchise. Yeah, these are from the Fast Company. Well, wait a minute. It's Fast Company in April of 2018. And then we have an article in Variety, that would be from back in February. Talent agencies turn to popular podcasts for new IP developing films, TV projects, and more. Lime Time, I'll try it again here, ended its first series on the charts on iTunes. And Limetown, its creators have their way. Limetown, about a fictional town with 300 people mysteriously disappearing in the Tennessee neurological research situation. Agencies are feverishly combing those Apple podcast charts to snap up clients and airing back to the rest of TV, or to launch the next business venture. 2017 was the biggest year yet for podcasts, which have episodes in popularity reaching the Apple Podcast. This is more of the Apple Podcast situation. They had a platform and now has a 500,000 active podcasts, including content in more than 100 languages. So it is becoming much more diverse, global, as one would call it, where just 5 years ago only 12% of Americans and 12% of older listeners listen to a podcast. A majority of course, the Edison research here, they are the big ones. 6 out of 10 have heard some kind of podcast out there from where we don't know. But this is Variety writing here. Various people, Miller and Lloyd, the director of Lego Movie and 21 Jump Street. Anyway, some of the people that are going, I suppose, to the podcast format. And a podcast doesn't necessarily have to mean a traditional series. And this is one we just talked about there. The lady from Puerto Rico was talking about that particular genre of podcast. So podcasts can be, like many other things, a way for people to get in the game that would not have been in the game. That is the biggest game changer there. And how the podcast is evolving from just an audio vehicle to this digital vehicle. Digital vehicle is coming very, very big. Now, the other side of more internet radio than podcasting are the 24-hour stations. We're going 24 hours at WBRN, or at least as close to 24 as we can get, with almost 3,500, 3,600 podcasts out there. We have enough content where we'd have to get more content to continually loop, as they say. But back to our partner Jerry Pippin, I mentioned him to begin with. What Jerry did was revolutionize it, not only with a live radio station, but also putting what he called the pods. He did not call it podcasting. Anyway, he had the pods there back roughly almost 20 years ago. And that was one way that people were able to download it. And they were working, the Jerry Pippin Productions, they were working off his servers over in Secaucus, New Jersey. So you can have your cloud implementation any place you want. You can go to Lipson's, you can go to the Bloombergs, the Blueberries, not the Bloombergs, not in that business yet, but you can go there and they will host your not only the actual podcast, but they will also provide the management of the podcast. They will serve as an aggregator type operator, that they will put you on iTunes, they will put you on Spotify, and various other places. They'll automate that process for you. Some of the those types of broadcast systems like Streaka. Streaka is one of the more advanced ones, because you can actually, they have the tools there where you can build your own podcast platform. You can be on that platform, and you can be live there. You can use Skype, and revolutionizes that. They are actually the owners of a Blog Talk. Now, Blog Talk, the advantage I still see in it, you can actually host a call-in show there on Blog Talk. And some numbers are provided for you if you have a call-in show, or if you have a guest and want the guest to actually talk to people. That's a little different type of a podcast. Is more radio where you have guests, but a lot of the hosts now have guests, but they don't do the call-in format. It's usually pre-recorded and, of course, edited. We use Audacity here, the open source software. Got that from Daniel J. Lewis himself. Want to plug Mr. Lewis. You can find him, and he's one of the best in the business, if not the best in the business. If you want to learn about podcasting, his episodes there that will teach you much of what you want to do. Now, there are other coaching outfits out there, that the School of Podcasting, he's good. I can't think of his name right now. Out of Ohio. I think he's out of Columbus. But anyway, nonetheless, there are many, many people that will teach you to podcast for a fee. Now, this lady Cross here, that's in New Zealand, Australia, wherever, she has some courses there, and a little bit more of it she actually does with clients, not only necessarily podcasting, but how to do other types of things, such as speech, etc. She uses the traditional 3 R's. I think she's added a fourth to it: the who, what, where, and when. And I think she also adds the why. You hear her talk about that after we leave here. But some interesting concepts, and I'm taking at university a media in a business course, and how that is becoming more and more. Now, it involves much media, but all of this various types of media are converging. Whether you talk about the Facebooks of the world, or you are talking about internet radio / podcasting, the new digital cast, that is Professor Rush out of out of Berkeley does those. Dan Rabber did do some of those. Now Dan Rabber is on iTunes with his new. He still has News and Guts there. We follow him. Dan Rabber's cast. We put them up from time to time. His audio cast. And so a lot of people I were doing audio are doing digital. It doesn't really matter, or you can do digital on iTunes. Audio actually it's digital, so it's converging. More and more of it's going to digital platforms. And how will this address iTunes? Well, obviously there will be in Facebook accounts out there, and if you're on Facebook, you're at a much bigger situation. One of the problems with iTunes is you have to download Apple's program. And many people, unless they have an Apple device, just really will not do that. But you also have Android now, or Google Play there, and I think we're on that, hopefully. Or we should be on it because we use Android exclusively. But those are some of the other outlets, and more of them are coming up there. iHeart's doing a very good job of broadcasting. Is a radio station. But the advantage with them is they have over 800 radio stations. You can go to any iHeart station in North America or New Zealand or wherever, and you can just simply do a search for Boston Red, and you will get most of our productions or shows, or whatever you want to call them. And, of course, Numbers Man is there also. That is our macroeconomic broadcast. You can find it there on iHeartRadio, or you can go to Stitcher. Both for iHeart. iHeart has a mobile app. Most of the people come to us via mobile. Stitcher does. A lot of people come to us via Stitcher. You can go to Spotify and find us there, either on the website or Spotify's mobile app. And of course, YouTube. You can find us on YouTube, an audio version of there. And you can watch the Twitter feeds, the various Twitter feeds going out there, or find us on Facebook. Very important for broadcasters to be available in search. And we're working on our site, bostonred.org, to bring it up to date. We've been doing that the last 2 months and haven't made as much progress, but this is the election season. Incidentally, we will return later here with the Monday Morning Quarterback. That's where we're quarterbacking the Sunday talk show. Will be more of this week quarterbacking the news because there's a lot of news out there, particularly swirling around the Kavanaugh hearing, the FBI investigations. That is something a lot of people are talking about, and we'll have the latest there. We specialize also in polling. We have polling from various posters. We go to handicappers like Charlie Cook, and also the modelers such as Nate Silver's shop over there. And we also go to places like the Crystal Ball. We have our own model operation called the Ouija board. We input that in, and incidentally, before the November midterm elections, we will have that information at bostonred.org. And you can see the others. The New York Times is doing a very good job, incidentally, at polling races in states that you need not Seneca there, that are normally not covered. So the polling is getting better. The modeling is getting apprehensive, but we keep looking at these elections. Nonetheless, on September the 30th, we've sort of went over a little bit here, but this is a basic September 30th time stamp. This is Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth.
Meet Edgar. And, you know, I use I use eClincher right now. I once used Meet Edgar. I've used both platforms. I love eClincher. Right now, guys, I'm able to post anywhere between 200 to 250 posts a week in Twitter. majority of those tweets are coming by way of eClincher. Each and every Sunday, or at least every other week, I'm able to add, a few new posts for an episode that's coming live. Once I add it to eClincher, I no longer have to add that same tweet or post back to that platform. It's a category that I'm setting up for my guests for Twitter or for Facebook or whatever platform. And I tell eClincher, look, I want 7 posts to go out each day for Twitter, right? Or 10 posts to go out each day for Twitter. And so across the week, it's sending out 70 posts for that category of content. And it will cycle through whatever's in that categories library. So if I had, for example, 200 posts, right, in there, I probably have 300 and something posts in there now, in one bucket for Trailblazer guests that I've built up over the last couple of years. So there are 300 posts in this one bucket. And in that bucket, I say post out, 100 times a week, for example. Your 300 posts, what it's going to do is it's going to cycle through that post for 3 weeks, 100 posts each week. And it gets through all the posts and it will cycle right back through and come back through. But the likelihood is by the time it cycles back through, that post that came up on a Monday at 11 a.m. is now cycling back through on a Saturday at 2 p.m. Completely different person is seeing that tweet, and the life of a tweet is all of 10 minutes. So the great thing is that, that content gets to be seen by different people, at different times. And it really helps to continue to keep our content growing. So I hope that I've shared some wisdom and knowledge. I see my man Dave here. And Dave?
Yeah, man, every time you join International Podcast Day or anytime I've seen you speak.
Un podcastera. Este es un proyecto que debería estar explicando Pato, pero Pato está ahorita en el limbo. Entonces les voy a platicar que casi hace casi 2 años, a través de Telegram, que es, para los que no saben, es un mensajero que es muy similar al WhatsApp, pero que nos gusta más y tiene ciertas características que la hacen ideal para grupos. Entonces creamos un grupo. Pato es uno de los fundadores. Actualmente ustedes pueden participar. Ya se cerraron los espacios para que estén así como platicando al aire, como lo estamos haciendo nosotros, pero sí pueden ustedes acercarse al sitio en donde van a ver el calendario, quienes participan. A lo mejor conocen a algún podcaster de los que están allí, hombres o mujeres, y a lo mejor pueden decirle, ¿por qué no me dejas que te mande un mensaje? Mándenles un mensaje de audio, mándenles alguna participación. Si ustedes tienen algo que regalar, también pueden ser nuestros patrocinadores. Entonces, unionpodcastera.com/maratón es el sitio en donde está toda la información, y lo importante es que separen alguna de las 24 horas del sábado 20 al domingo 21 y nos escuchen, nos acompañen y estén ahí con nosotros, así como están ahorita, nada más que todo el día en español.
Bien, excelente. Repetimos entonces de vuelta el día. Vamos, es el sábado.
But also the international podcast community as well for representing yourselves, your nations, your countries. We really appreciate it today.
Thank you.
Alrighty, take care.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, happy International Podcast Day, everybody.
Yeah,
everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
To get a little bit more detail, for our platinum sponsor, 3 years run in Blueberry. They're a full-service podcasting company providing podcast hosting, stats, advertising opportunities. You can find more at blueberry.com. And thank you to our silver sponsors. Repurpose.io automatically converts your audio podcast into engaging videos and uploads them to YouTube and other social media channels. You can try Repurpose for free. Head over to repurpose.io/IPD to start today. And of course, podcastsuccessacademy.com. This is a resource-packed community offering tools, workshops, tutorials, courses, and so much more to teach you some skills that no one told you needed to succeed as a podcaster. Head over to podcastsuccessacademy.com to gain your free access today. Well, Anne-Marie, I know there are several people in the podcasting space that want to learn how to conduct better interviews. Sometimes it's a struggle. Sometimes the conversation gets awkward. And we're looking forward to you sharing some of the things you've learned over the number of years you've been podcasting. So thank you, and welcome to International Podcast Day.
Thank you very much. And as I mentioned before we went on the call, I hope that I'm able to provide incredible value for everyone. So let's dive in. I know as podcasters and interviewers, we always hope that we're going to capture a great story and weave our content alongside those that are adding to the conversation. But every now and again, it happens where we get a difficult guest where you just don't feel that you are on point and you think, goodness, can I really publish this piece of content? And I know if I look back over the 10 years, there have been many podcasts that I've thought, oh, can I really share this? And for some of them, they didn't come to air. So over the last 10 years, what I've done is I put together some techniques, some tools, and some systems that have really helped me. And I want to share what I've done so that you can incorporate some of these things in what you're doing. Maybe you're already doing these things, and that's a great big tick. That great, got that covered. Now, my background is in personal branding and communication. So some of the things that I'll be sharing today are around the psychology of communication, because with a podcast, we are communicating. And one of the things we don't have, unless, of course, you're streaming live, which is what we do often with our podcast, you don't have that visual element. So it's very much auditory. And there's some things that you can do and start to do and maybe not do so much that will enhance the conversation, enhance the level of engagement that you have with your audience. Now, I love the quote by Steve Jobs, and he said the most powerful person in the world is a storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, the values, and the agenda of an entire generation that is to come. Now, if we were to take a step back for a moment, each and every one of us is a storyteller. Yes, we bring other people into the conversation through the platform that we are building, but we ultimately are the person who weaves the conversation together. And one of the things that I was taught many years ago when I reached out and got a mentor to help me in better communicating, better creating the nuances that I knew my ideal clients or my audience host. So that means that you've got opportunities to build know, like, and trust as a host with every new person that happens to stumble across your podcast, because the topic you are speaking about has attracted them, has engaged with them because it's something that they're struggling with. But what we do as part of that conversation and the environment we create on our podcast, even with our guest, is going to determine whether the guest reaches out to you or whether there's a potential JV opportunity, lots of opportunities from our guests, but also for the listener's point of view. Are they going to come back? Because after that interview, the content has been shared and that's been great, but there's something about you that listener resonates with and thinks, you know what, I'm going to come back and listen to another show. So the first thing I want to talk about today is setting the stage, some of the things that I do to help prepare, because some of the things that happen down the track, the difficult guests, the guests that talk too much versus the guests that talk too little, and you think, oh my goodness, I have a whole 29 minutes to go, right through to someone who is self-promoting all the time. A lot of that does not necessarily need to happen if you prepare beforehand. And I do a lot of preparation at the front end to save a lot of heartache and a lot of editing at the back end. So I want to share that with you today. I want to also talk to you about what I call the secret formula. It's not something that I created, but rather something that I learned many years ago when I started to get out on stage and start to speak. And it was something that I've used to model all of my podcast shows on. Every single presentation I actually model on this 4-step secret formula that I want to share with you. I want to share with you some of the systems and the processes that I use, that I talked about earlier, that saves me a lot of heartache in the back end. And then I'm going to talk about the interviewing, managing your guests and the flow of information. Now, you might be thinking, I want to hear about some of the tools, some of the techniques that you use to manage the guest. Hopefully, you won't have as many difficult guests once you follow the process and the systems that I have in place, so that the conversation does flow and you don't need to go into control. So let's back up a little bit and talk about setting the stage. Some of the things that we need to be mindful of is that we have to manage and steer the conversation in a way that's relevant to your audience, relevant to the topic and theme that you're talking about. And this is for your overall podcast in general, as well as the specific topic on that show. So we've got the podcast as a whole and then the episode of that show. And, sometimes you might have a guest that is very overbearing, and quite controlling, or they have their own agenda. And if you're not really clear on the consistency around branding, and I always go back to branding, every single piece of content, every tweet, every podcast episode, every conversation, how you introduce the guest, your outro, music, everything, sound effects, all impact and create a brand experience on your podcast. And if you're not doing that with intention, if you don't know, if you have not defined that, then it's very easy for a guest with a very strong personality, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you haven't set that stage and deliberately creating that in every single podcast episode and overall in your podcast, it's very difficult for listeners to describe in a few words who you are, what you stand for, and what they're going to get from every single one of your podcasts. People talk about you whether you know it or not, and so what you're creating as far as your brand, as far as your podcast is concerned, people will start to create and assume their own perspective if we have not set that stage and do that consistently. So show theme, show brand. Consistency is everything. And as a storyteller, what we need to do is we need to have a number of roles as part of that storyteller. We need to weave in various elements of the conversation so that it flows. And if we don't flow and we're jumping and going backwards and forwards, and then we're doing a backtrack and then a backtrack of a backtrack, by the time the audience has gone 5 minutes in, they're thinking that this is so confusing and overwhelming. Guess what? Stop, and then they're off to the next podcast. So we need a structure and a format, and I'm going to share with you on that secret 4-step formula in a moment about what a really good formula is. And so we need to also weave in our own personality and our own mannerisms and style, because that is something that you're going to bring to the podcast each and every time. And the beautiful thing about that is you might be talking about the exact same topic as 10 other podcast hosts because it's a really hot topic. But your journey, your experience, your heartaches, your failures, your successes, all of that woven in together as to who you are, your mannerisms and characteristics, the quirky sense of personality. And for some of you, you're trying to hide this, but I encourage you to bring that forward, because that's what's going to make you different from everyone else. And it's going to really impact the experience you create on your podcast. So if you are someone who's naturally humorous, be humorous, do it with intention. Use that to weave, your podcast together, and your guests will know to expect that. So really important as that storyteller. Who are you as that storyteller? And make sure that you weave the conversation together in a flow, bringing in your own nuances, your own little snippets of information to add value to that conversation. One of the things that I do intentionally, and this is what I want to talk about now, is the things I do, and mindset is everything, is a couple of things. Be curious. You need to be curious, because if you don't have a curious perspective, then, you don't dive deep into or listening out for something that guest says, which may just pass over. But you think, I want to dive deeper into that. Let's just back up a minute here before you move on. Great golden nuggets, but I want to find out more. What do you mean by that? And then that can create a whole flavor of conversation, which the guest may not have covered before, but is very relevant to your audience. So be curious. We don't need to know everything. When I started podcasting back in 2008, I was really fortunate because I had a co-host who had done some training in radio, and he was quite efficient in the way managing the call, and I was able to take a back seat. And if I still go back and listen to some of those old shows on Blog Talk Radio, I often cringe. But the reason I was cringing was because I thought, I don't know enough about that topic to really be able to talk into that. But as a storyteller, as a host, you don't necessarily need to know everything, because why would you invite guests on the show? But what you do need to know is to be able to know when to jump in, to stop the guest, to dive a little bit deeper, how to weave various, topics of each show together in an overall show that flows. And those are the things that we need to do. So be curious. Trust that you can do this. You don't need to do everything. And be yourself, as I mentioned earlier. Be yourself. For me, one of the things that I love to do is to create a platform where my guest can shine. I don't necessarily need to have any, contribution to the show. And I think some podcast hosts, you can kind of almost see that they're battling with the guest. into, well, I know a little bit more about that, or, I challenge that. Now, unless you are someone who is a host with intention that is there to challenge and be quite controversial, then go ahead and do that. That's on brand. That's very much you. But I've listened to a few shows where it's like, oh, there's something funny going on here, the nuances between the relationships being built. So for me, I just go with a mindset of curiosity, want to create an environment as if I was sitting across the table from someone, having a cup of coffee and having a chat with a friend I have yet to meet, and just asking questions and laughing. I mean, fun is one of my core values. And if it's not fun, then why would we do it? And sometimes the guests at the beginning of the show, they're quite nervous. And I just go in there and set that stage. So with intention, again, it's with intention that this is going to be fun. The conversation that I have is such that eliminates any nervousness or anxiousness from the guest, so that they can speak with authority in a topic that I know that they know, and they bring that forward. And what will often happen at the end of 20 or 30 minutes, I'll say, well, that's a wrap. And they go, really? I could speak all day on this. And that, I think, is my goal as the host, my role as that storyteller, to create an environment where people can share their information. So let's talk about the secret formula, the 4-step. This is what I promised to share with you. So we all know that they're adult learners. There's a couple of things about them that we need to know. They need buy-in, and that what's in it for them. The WIIFM concept, very, very important. I'm looking at some slides here because I use the same principle when I'm sharing information to my clients who want to get out on stage to speak. You can use the same principle for this as well, even if you're giving a short presentation. And you can use it in a podcast episode too. So here's some things we need to know about adult learners. They need buy-in. They also need that what's in it for them concept. They're generally skeptical. As adults, we are. If someone says something to us, we kind of do an internal check and think, how does that fit with what I know? And if it goes against our paradigm or our understanding of something, we're more open to going, you know what, I don't really know if I agree with that. We've got boundaries. We are judgmental. There's this thought process, this analytical process. They need decisiveness, and they need structure, and they need teaching and information for right now. This is generally speaking, of course, but just things you need to consider. And they need to have this in place even in your podcast. Now, there are unique learning styles and unique communication styles. And we know as adults, and I'm sure you know already, but I want to mention it again because it's leading up into the 4 key areas that I want to share today. People perceive information differently. They process information differently. And our unique learning style, it's derived by a combination of our own perception and processing techniques. Now, believe it or not, I'm more a visual person, but I love podcasting, and I love listening to audios now, because I find as a visual learner, if I'm watching someone, I'm distracted because I'm looking at what's going on in the background, and look at that microphone that they've got there. Look at her earrings. All of those things are quite distracting. So for me, I know that if I really want to listen to the information, I will minimize the screen if I'm looking at a video often, and I'll just listen to the audio. And because I've had decades of experience coaching and consulting over the phone and on Skype, and we didn't have tools and technologies like Zoom with video now that we have today, I became quite affluent in my auditory capacity, being able to hear the story behind the story if someone said something in that voice. And I think when we realize that, we realize the power that we have in our voice as we're sharing those stories. So let's look at these 4 different learning styles. Now, none of these learning styles, one is better than the other. They are all unique, and they are all relevant, and the same for each person. So someone might be one certain learner and another a certain learner. And it doesn't mean one person is going to learn more than the other. So no comparison, and no one is better than the other. So what this enables you to do, so for those people who like to know, well, why should I do this? What benefit does it have if I use these 4 steps in the formatting of my podcast? Good question. Here is what they'll do. It's going to connect and engage with each person, no matter what learning style that they are in or what learning preference that they have. It enables you to deepen that relationship and a learning experience with each person. Because what happens is, as you share information in the right way and in the right process, it triggers the left and right brain. And that's what we do when we learn. It's a processing technique as we're learning and hearing this information. And when you connect and deepen your relationship with people, they're going to be able to likely remember you, but also the experience that you created long after the content has finished. They're going to remember the experience that you created, and they're more likely to want to reach out to you and start to work with you. So the origins of the secret formula, for those of you who like to know a little bit of the facts and some of the, the statistics and so forth, it was modeled after a format system developed by Bernice McCarthy, and she's the author of Format and Action, Creative Lesson Plans for Teaching to Learning Styles with Right and Left Techniques. And the secret formula is why, what, how, and what if. If you do nothing but know these or learn these and take these away, it has been a good learning for you from this presentation. Those are the 4 key steps that I use for every single training and how I format my entire podcast show. And let me just dive into each of those a little bit, give you a bit of a background on what each of those why, what, how, and what if is. The why is specifically talking to innovative learners. They're the learners that are saying, well, why should I learn this? You want to capture their attention right at the beginning, because if you haven't, guess what? They've moved on. They've gone somewhere else where they're going to get that information. I am very much an innovative learner because it sits in with the visual aspect of things. We're quite quick and typically we probably are the ones that listen to podcasts on double speeds and video on double speeds because people talk too slow, sadly, for us. We need to paint a picture for them. We need a bigger picture. What's involved? Where you're going to learn and take away from this particular podcast episode, and they need to have meaning and purpose and a reason for learning. So we need to give that up front. And I'll share with you in a moment how I do that. Actually, I'll do that now so it makes sense. So what I do when I structure my show right at the beginning, that's what I might do. I might say something. Are you struggling with learning how LinkedIn can optimize your social media, or do you want to get in front of key journalists and have been struggling on LinkedIn? Is that something you're trying to do? So you're tapping into the problem. I mean, that was horrendous. If I spent a bit of time on that, I'd come up with a better headline. But that's something that I might lead with a show. You're an ambitious entrepreneur who wants to leverage LinkedIn to get out in front of the 96% of journalists who are there searching for experts. Well, stick around because my guest today is going to show you how. That, if someone is struggling with that and they want that information, don't know about you, but I think I'll be sticking around because I want to know more. So that's tapping into that why. Right at the beginning, paint that picture. The next step I mentioned is the what. And this is specific to analytical learners. They want to know what it is. So some of the things that you want to share with them, interesting facts. Where did it come from? Who created it? What is it really used for? Statistics, things like that, because they want to deepen their understanding and have it be that it's founded on relevant, studies, and it's not just some pie in the sky that someone has just, picked out of the thin air somewhere. So what I then tend to do is qualify or validate some information about my guests. Joining me today is so-and-so. He's an award-winning, so sometimes awards can be beneficial in this specific aspect. It can be number of years. It can be where they have been, where they are, if they're a host or an expert on a particular site, that works really well. So validating information about my guests so that the analytical learners go, oh, okay, so that particular guest, there's some creds on the street there. I think I'll listen to that. So again, you just dive in a little bit more into the what. Then the how. This is the bulk of the interview. This is where we really dive into some of the key steps, the 3 key points. And what I do at the beginning of the introduction, I will actually, and this is what I prepare before I even record the interview, because I record the interview from woe to go. So my guest is there while I do all of this introduction. And the reason I do that is because a number of guests have said, whilst they've listened, they're on fire. I actually mix in the music. I know a lot of you don't. That's okay. But I also have my music there. And for me, it has to be fun. It has to be upbeat. So by the time that I finish my intro, my guests are bopping in their seats. And it's like, oh, okay, I have to go and share my knowledge now. But I do that for a reason, because I want my guests to be pumped. And I share the 3 key things. And this is what Bob is going to share. Number 1. Number 2, number 3, let's dive in. And so people know as they're listening, these are the 3 key things that, we're going to walk away with today. And then I use those three key things to structure the show. So I hope that makes sense. That's how I sort of use that. And then that's the how. We dive into the first point and say, Bob, one of the things that you say is blah, 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 blah. Let's dive in. What are these three things that we are not doing wrong? Oh, right. And then we'll dive into that and we'll pull that apart. But the how speaks to common sense learners, getting back to that formula, the common sense learners who are asking, how does it work? So you want to explain, you want to dive deep. This is where you ask these really good questions. You dive in deep, you've set the stage. Now we can give them a hands-on demonstration in an audio format, of course. But you're helping people to understand how it works, and whatever it is, the topic that you're talking about. Because people want to know, and case studies are really good, statistics are really good. You can dive into that, and how-tos are really good as well. So you spend the bulk of the conversation on the how. Then the what if, this is for dynamic learners. So these are for the learners that have listened to the show and they're thinking, okay, what else? Where else can I apply it? And this is a really good place where you can ask the guest to share the next step, the call to action. And, where else is this applicable or important? So you're giving them a bit of an overview as well. You've dived deep into the topic and pulled that apart, but you're also sharing with them other aspects that they can use. What else do they need to know? Because these guys are action-oriented. They want to get into action. Now, using this 4-step formula is fantastic for developing, each particular episode. But it's also good if you are so on brand and the guests that you share and bring on your show adds real value and credibility also to an area, I would assume, if you're using your podcast to build your influence and become that influential thought leader in your industry. It also speaks into what you can support as well. So if you've provided a really enticing, educational, engaging content in your episode, you can also encourage people to reach out to you with, whatever you've created in your call to action. Because people who have just listened and it's been so valuable, that content, they're going to want to, they'll be asking, what next? What next? Where can I learn a little bit more? So this is a really great opportunity for you to share that call to action too. There's some specific formulas and lengths of time, but I won't dive into that because I don't want to really overwhelm you with too much of the formula. But really, again, if you spend a lot of more content or time on the how to really dive in, but you have to have that why. What's in it for me? If you have not captured the innovative learners at the beginning, you've lost them already. Then if you've got bringing along those innovative learners, if you have not tapped into the analytical learners with information, this is going to be very difficult for you to bring along those analytical learners into the next stage, which is the common sense learners. How does it work? And then once you've got everybody on board, listen to the podcast, diving deep, then of course you've got to tap into the dynamic learners, which is the what if, that everybody is listening. And when you've got an on-brand, on-topic podcast, you know that your ideal client, your ideal JV partner, alliance partner, referral partner are listening, and you're continuing to build that know, like, and trust with that relevant content. So I hope that was helpful. This is probably something that I spent a lot of time on the show. And again, this all